The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses, nonprofits, and HR practitioners better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources needed to get HR right. For more information, check out our website at theteam@hrstories.com. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, HR and leadership experts John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian dive into the stories that matter most to you, our listeners. We have found that there is a lesson in every story. And now our host, John Thalheimer and Chuck Smikian. All right, it is time. It's your weekly dose of HR from the, oh my goodness,
Keep
HR
going.
Stories, where there is
Yes.
a lesson in every story. As Chuck knows, I've been traveling the countryside, doing some work in different businesses and nonprofits, very enjoying myself, but just a little discombobulated trying to get back on there. Chuck, how are you? What's going on?
Yeah, well, folks, glad to have you here. John, glad to have you back in the studio. Not that you went anywhere, but it's always glad to have you back. I know you've been traveling the country, teaching leadership classes, folks. This is the HR Stories podcast where the lesson is in every story. But, John and I are HR consultants, leadership consultants, organizational gurus. Well, that's actually John, not so much me. And we are authors. We are excited over the last week or so. You've heard us talking about the ultimate guide to HR checklist edition. We've taken 85 things that you would find in an HR department, from your basic stuff like hiring and termination and investigations and creating mission statements and vision and statements and all that stuff. We've boiled it as best we can into checklists, and it is changing the world of HR. We were featured in September in HR Professionals magazine. So they picked us up, and the book is good for 3 SHRM credits. So SHRM approved, and we've got other announcements coming as we go along. So John, you asked how I'm doing. I'm doing great because we're doing great and having fun and loving all the stuff that we do. There you go. Hands
I love
down.
it. Yeah, I want to correct one thing you said, Chuck.
Yes.
We don't have 80 different things. We have 80 different processes we looked at that we created checklists for.
Yes.
Probably 85 different things that we hear a lot about in our training, in our workshops, in our consultancy, that people are like, wait, how do you do that? Wait, what's the process? And we wanted always to leave them with something. And so that's what we did. So I want to make sure we get rid of that word.
Oh, no, that's great.
In there as well. So just,
that's
kind of clarifying for everyone out there. And I'm glad, I feel, Chuck, that you are lighter. Like, you feel much more energized. And I think it's kind of because the book's been launched, right? Because there's so much work. I know people know this, but there's so much work that leads up to launching the book that now you're like, okay, I'm not gonna let you rest on your laurels, but you do have a more intense focus. Even in our conversations off air, you're definitely ready to go and get things done, which I appreciate.
Ready to rock and roll. And we always rock and roll with news. You can use news of the week, HR in the news. HR in the news. That's what we call it. HR in the news. And I've got some articles, some interesting things that I found that are happening. And I didn't know this, John, but Monster, we used to post jobs on Monster. You need a job, you go to Monster. Their
Monster.
competitor was Career Builder. They're merging. Monster and Career Builder are merging.
That's interesting.
Yeah. First of all, I was surprised they were still in business, because I can't say the last time I've looked for a job or even posted a job on Monster or Career Builder. It's always Indeed. And I'm sorry I'm giving up a shout out to Indeed, but that's really what we've been doing. But, these two, they're out there, they're coming together. Boy, I remember the days when Monster would sponsor Super Bowl ads and Career Builder Super Bowl ads, those days. So anyways, I found that to be really interesting. It is completed, by the way. It is completed. They merged and they completed. I didn't know this, but apparently it was announced in July.
Well, it kind of makes sense. I mean, they were doing the same thing, and now they can, again, right? Here's what happens, merger and acquisitions. There's going to be a reduction in workforce, right? Because they're not going to need 22 accountants and 22 HR experts, and they're going to create efficiencies and all that kind of stuff. And so that'll be great for the companies, maybe not great for the people that are employed there, right? And so something to do. And it'd be interesting to see how that now stacks up to Indeed, right? And LinkedIn and Ladders and all those other places.
ZipRecruiter, sure. Well, I will tell you, as someone that posts jobs all the time, and as I am doing in my current role, I do a lot with Indeed. Indeed has changed their platform. They're really trying to suck more money out of companies, and you don't get higher rankings on your jobs unless you pay, and it's become very expensive. So I think there's a niche and an opportunity if these folks can get their stuff together to steal market share. Hey, there you go. I said it right here on the HR Stories podcast.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, that is Chuck Samicki in his economic forecast for the HR platform. It's funny. I was doing some leadership retreat work last week or a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to the leadership team there, and probably 60% got their job through Craigslist.
Really?
Yeah. So this was, they've been with the company 6-10 years, right? Somewhere in there. And it's interesting. Like, that's what they were doing. And these people are very loyal. I have never seen a more loyal group of individuals. So again, it's thinking about where you're looking and what do you want from those people? So
wow. Yeah. It's amazing. That's amazing. I got to tell you, my entire career, I think it's been 25-ish or 30 years since I got a job where I actually applied through Indeed or something like that and got an interview and got hired. In fact, I got to tell you, I've never been hired through Indeed. I've applied many times throughout my career as I've looked for different things, but so it's always been through networking and through someone knows someone who knows someone. And in this case, that's kind of an oddball thing, Craigslist, but I guess it works.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because when I talk to people about how do I get a job in here, how do I get a job there, and how do the first thing I say to them, you need to figure out where those people are and network with them, because that's going to get you the job 95% of the time, because people hire, and again, for big corporations, it's a little different, right? Because there's more gatekeepers there. But for finding most jobs, networking and being there when that person needs you really helps. And people are like, oh gosh, I know so-and-so, let me get them in here. And then you get hired to do that. Or connected through somebody. My last job, I was connected through somebody. I knew somebody. They're like, you should apply for this job. And I'm like, all right, well, let me apply for it. Didn't think I'd get it. Changed my career.
So, there you go. What news you got today? News we can use.
This is a little older, right? It's a couple weeks older now, but Amazon CEO said that everyone in Amazon needs to come back in the office. And I wanted to read his quote to you about why he said this was important. He explained the benefits previously in a post that he did to them in 2023. But he says, in summary, we observed that it's easier for our teammates to learn, model, and practice and strengthen our culture. Collaborating, brainstorming, and inventing are simply and more effective. Teaching and learning from one another are more seamless, and teams tend to be better connected to one another. And so he's talking about people working together in the office.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think that is the critical part with remote, right? I think remote performance is amazing. I think people that are working as individual contributors, just working alone in your office, people just kind of, right? Mm-hmm. However, the collaboration piece, the connection piece is harder to do. There, I don't think it's not possible. I just think companies haven't tried to figure out how to do it well. And the easy solution is, well, let's just go back to what we were doing before. Let's face it, in some cases, people being closer together is not great for collaboration, because just the little petty things get in the way and all that kind of stuff. But it is something that I think somebody needs to work on, is how do we create collaboration in a hybrid business model so that our teams are being very productive, getting things done, and at the same time, increasing innovation, increasing collaboration, increasing teamwork.
Yeah. I mean, I love the remote thing. And I think really hybrid can be the answer in the long run. In some ways, I went away for a week, went to North Carolina, went to my cabin. Those are longtime listeners know I have a cabin in Sapphire, North Carolina, and I go up there like an old man in the cabin, right? And I'll just sit down. Sometimes I'll be up there 3-4 weeks at a time. I can't do it. I have a regular job now, but I worked from the cabin. Okay. It was okay. And I got stuff done. But long-term doing that in the hospitality world, where I have to be there to see people, to touch people, to walk around, it just, I can see where maybe this person from Amazon, the president, CEO, has a point on just a larger scale. Mine's a smaller scale, but I can kind of see that.
Well, and I don't know the internal workings of Amazon, but I would be interested because they have a lot of people that work in warehouses, right? And so they have to be there 24/7 and that kind of stuff. And so we always, when I worked in a 24/7 environment, we tried to make sure the managers realized that their role was to oversee the teams and they needed to be there for a majority of that time. And then we sort of translated that into the office work, like, hey, we can't allow you to not come to work because of them working. We kind of try to balance and try to figure that out. But if you're in the service industry within your company, right? So HR in the service industry within their company, it's nice to be able to there, as you say, Chuck, walk around, talk to the employees, connect with the employees if they're going to be there 24/7. And if they're not, and the whole model can be hybrid, then let's do it. Let's make sure that happens.
Okay. I got, speaking of HR and HR walking around, they're going to be walking around telling employees that healthcare is going up. Healthcare is going up. This just in, there's an actuary, a company called Mercer. They did a survey, National Survey of Employers 2024, and they find that generally healthcare costs are going to go up 5.8% in 2025. I know a lot of our HR folks are getting ready for re-enrollment. Some companies, they're saying, especially fully insured, may see an increase as much as 9%. I know our company was able to kind of keep that down maybe into the lower ranges. But if there's a company that has higher usage, maybe they have more employees using the healthcare benefits. The healthcare companies take that into consideration, and so they may see an increase. I think everyone's going to see an increase. They attribute it to price dynamics. They call it, inflation, but the supply of healthcare workers and the gap between that and health services that are on demand. So there's more demand. I don't know, maybe this is a time to talk about healthy living so we don't get sick. But other than that, folks, get ready because it's coming. A shot in the arm.
That's so funny, Chuck, that you said that, because I was listening to All Things Considered probably a week or so ago, and they had this story where there was a manufacturing company down in Tulsa, Alabama. And so they manufactured window screens. And so they made a big change. And down the street from them, there is a healthcare place, I don't know what you want to call it, but a healthcare place down the road from them. And their employees can go there and get doctor's visits for free, can get medical pharmacy for free. 100%. The company has invested in this clinic for their employees and their families. And what they have found is, in the long run, that's saving them money. Yeah. About 5% to 6% a year. And what they've done is they've taken that investment and they've opened a summer camp for their employees' kids. And so it is a new way of looking at it. And it's interesting when you're coming up with, more pricing. They just said, look, I think the CEO said, wow, our healthcare prices, how can we do this? And it really is about prevention. And they had, great stories about how things were caught early on because people were going, there wasn't. And what the CEO said, he looked at what was the number one concern, right? Going back to our conversation about holistic employment, Chuck, what was their number one concern? And it was medical expenses. And he asked, right? And so we know when workers are dealing with stress outside of work, it comes to work and they're less productive. They less do things. And he's like, what can I do to alleviate that burden? And so he helped open this healthcare clinic where the company pays for all that stuff. To me, it's an interesting model. We'll see how, does it work in the long term? I think they've been doing it for 5 or 6 years now. So obviously it's working for that particular company in that particular area. But it will be interesting to see if more and more companies go back. It's kind of going back to that model of the company providing the healthcare prevention and that kind of stuff to reduce insurance costs.
Yeah, where I've seen it in action, there's a place called Rosen Hotels in Orlando. They do that, and they've been doing it for years, and the employees love it. And there's a lot of follow up on folks. They don't let things go, and so it's an amazing. We could talk for a long time about that. Do you have any other news to use before we get into our story today? Story.
And it's less HR and more employee management.
Yes, of course.
And so I just want to kind of call this out. And as I said earlier, I've been doing some leadership retreats and strategic planning sessions. And I was talking to leaders that have been leading for 5-10 years. Mm-hmm. And I was amazed how many of them didn't have any leadership training. I wasn't really amazed, right? Because I've been in this role for a long time and I get it and I know it and I pay attention to it. But they were just ready to soak up anything. Like, we're doing this strategic planning session. Somebody's like, well, how do I give feedback to somebody? And I literally stopped what I was doing and I'm like, well, let's talk about that right now. And I went into, I kind of live and breathe that. And I was like, okay, well, here's the steps you need to do. And here's what you need to do. And you could just see that clicking with them going, oh, that's what I need. That's why it's not working. And so this is for the listeners out there. If you have managers and leaders for that, please reach out. Let's figure out the way to work together so you can get those people trained. It's going to improve HR. It's going to improve your employee experience. It's going to improve your bottom line. Yeah. And so, to me, I was literally sitting there going, shocked, right? Here they are. I've been leading this company the company's 10 years old. Most of them been in their leadership role for 6 years.
Yeah. And that's a great story.
Yeah. And so just getting that leadership training, I think it's just incredible. And feedback, right? Coaching. And then, Chuck and I always love throwing in the HR laws, making sure they're compliant with the law, right? And so getting all that done. So.
That's a great story. So that's how you do it.
Yeah. Oh God! And again, right? And it may seem
just
for
the
us,
reaction,
right?
just that
Been in
reaction.
business a long time, but to them, they've been so focused on the work, and this leading people has been easy, or like, oh, we got great people, and now as the company grows bigger, and they know talent is more important, now they're like, oh, wait, how do I make that get there? So. Yeah. It's a good thing, right? And so kind of going on and doing that.
So that's how I just love that reaction. All right. So John, why don't we take a quick break, folks? If you just, we'll be back on the other side of this little message to you. Once again, we are the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. John and I wrote a book recently, The Ultimate Guide to HR, Checklist Edition. We've talked about that. And we are excited. I just want to throw that out there. See you on the other side of the break. We've got a great story today about, well, it's something that every manager, every HR professional needs to know if you have people, and how they can hurt themselves in unusual ways without you being aware. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. We will see you after the break.
Hey, it's Chuck here with the team at HR Stories. You know, in the fast-paced world of HR, you need solutions fast. We are introducing our new book, The Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition, your go-to resource for navigating the complexities of HR with confidence and ease. Hey, whether you're an experienced HR professional, a student, or a small business owner, this book is designed to give you immediate answers to a wide range of HR challenges. You know, wasting time sifting through endless reference books, unreliable web content, countless YouTube videos, our guide cuts through the noise with over 80 actionable HR checklists that cover everything you need in the world of HR, from onboarding and performance management to legal compliance, crisis response. We've got you covered. Why is this book a must-have? Because it provides you with immediate answers, saving you time, helping you avoid costly mistakes, and it's an essential tool for anyone looking to elevate their HR game. So head on over to the Ultimate Guide to HR.com. That's Ultimate Guide to HR.com to get your copy of the Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist Edition. Streamline your HR tasks, stay compliant, and create a workplace where both employees and management thrive. Welcome back to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. John,
Chuck.
Working as an HR director, as a manager, operations person, I found that employee injuries are inevitable. You can train, you can put in protocols in place, you can emphasize safe work practices, create a safety culture, but at some point, injuries are still going to happen. And sometimes simple injuries like a cook cutting himself, maybe to just slips, trips, and falls, they will occur. And when that happens, you enter the world of workers' compensation. Okay. Today, we have a story that shows how a simple accident, literally getting out of bed, turned into a legal battle over workplace injury claims.
All right, so before we dig into this, I need, and I think our listeners are going to need, cover with us, what is workman's compensation? What is it? How does it work? Who does it benefit? Why do we have this crazy thing in the workplace?
Sure. So workers' compensation laws. Workers, right? The employees, compensation, pay. So workers' compensation laws are designed to make sure employees who get injured at work are compensated fairly. Typically, workers can claim like medical expenses, doctor visits, surgery, prescription, devices like orthopedic supports. They can even claim mileage going back and forth to the doctor. They claim wage loss benefits if their injury keeps them from working, or earning their usual amount. And for serious cases like permanent injuries or fatalities, additional benefits can be provided, including death benefits for surviving families. And I in researching this story, I came across one story where a 20-year-old, I would say kid, right? But a guy, 20-year-old man, was painting on a scaffolding. His paintbrush started to fall out of his hand and it started flipping, and he went to grab it, and he fell off the scaffolding, injuring his head, his neck, and he's going to need lifelong care. And I believe that workers' comp settlement settled for millions of dollars. They at the time that I read this, they said it was one of the largest settlements in workers' comp history. So it was because he's going to need 24-hour care around the clock. So that's what just a general definition of workers' compensation.
So basically, it's the employer ensuring that if something happens because of their negligence, or something happens because something happens, they have insurance to pay for it. So the employer's not on the hook. The insurance company's on the hook for it, right? And then the insurance company has their risk benefit analysis and does all that and says, okay, this is what it's going to cost you for your particular type of company.
Yes. And so it's like insurance. If you have employees, if you're self-employed, you carry workers' comp insurance. Most states require, employers to buy that to cover those work-related injuries, illnesses. It's interesting you say negligent. A lot of states have what they call no-fault states. In other words, it's not your fault. It's not the company's fault. It just is. But that's a whole other class. Today, we're going to stay with the very simple definitions, in that workers' compensation is a safety net for employees to ensure they're compensated for work-related injuries while also reducing liability for employers.
All right. And so how do the employees get paid? Explain that part to me.
Sure. So it's through the workers' comp carrier, which is the insurance company. Just like if you were, you have your car and you have Allstate and you get into an accident or someone hits you, the insurance company will pick up that cost. So the insurance company will pay the employee money for an injury. And that's very simple to say, but I'll just tell you that every state is different. Every state is different. And for example, in Florida, we have to submit a 13-week wage statement that goes back for the last 13 weeks prior to the employee being injured. So if they averaged, let's say, $500 a week, workers' compensation insurance is going to pay a good portion of that. They run those calculations, they issue the weekly checks, and if the employee is off work or can't work.
Doesn't sound like the best way to make money, right? Going through an accident and dealing with that accident, probably not the best way to make money.
Well, you would be surprised. I would say most people, yes, you're right. It is a painful way to make money. Most people want to work when they can. However, there are some people that will take advantage of that. Once again, another class, they're willing to go through that pain. But it is a safety net. And when it happens, usually after the doctor's appointment, there are work restrictions based on the injury for the employee. And if the company can't find work for the employee within those restrictions, then the employee, if they can find work within those restrictions, can't stand for more than 15 minutes, can't walk long distance, bending, pushing, squatting, that sort of thing. If they can work within those restrictions, then the employee can come back to work.
I get it.
Yes. So for me, usually as an HR director, I have a philosophy that everyone can work and should work. So I always try and get employees back. I'll do whatever I can do in my purview to make sure that to work with restrictions, even if it's not their primary job. As long as I can meet those restrictions, the employee can work, the employee can get paid, and they get paid their regular rate.
And that's usually, I mean, it's better for the company in the long run too, to get that employee back.
Yes.
And it can be, I mean, again, right, it's a mixed bag for employees. I can see, and sometimes it's for them to come back early. It may not be the best beneficial there, but we're working closely with Workman's Comp, the doctors, making sure all that happens. Can you give me some examples of how this played out in your workplace?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of times, you might have an employee that steps on in a hole, and they fall down and they injure maybe their arm or their leg. They can't stand. Maybe they can't lift certain things. So I will tell you, some employees, they do want to stay home because they do like those workers' comp benefits. They get a large percentage of their current pay. They don't have to work. They can basically do other things, right? However, I will work with those restrictions, and most people do want to come back to work. And so it might be, hey, let's see okay, you can roll napkins and silverware. Oh, you can, make phone calls. You can stuff some envelopes. You can watch the security cameras. We could put you at the welcome center. You could say hello to all the guests as they come by. We can give you a stool. You can sit at the host stand, and so there are a wide variety of things, at least in my workplace. And when you do that, John, that lowers your insurance costs, because now I'm paying as a company. Right. But the insurance company, just like if you got hit by in your car, some people are like, don't report it to the insurance company. I'll give you $1,000, and you're like, okay, that'll cover the cost, because then the insurance company raises the rates. So those are some of the examples of what I've done. And
I think that's interesting, right? Because I had an employee, it was a little different because she was out on FMLA. Right. But there were things we thought like, well, let's bring her back in because we have these list of things that could get done. And I think she hurt her back or her leg or something. So she couldn't lift. She couldn't do any of that. But there was tons of administration work we thought that she could do, but she got done with it in a week. And we're like, okay, now what we do? And so we had to send her back out on FMLA leave because we didn't have anything for her to do while she was healing.
Yeah. Yeah, I can be very, very, very creative, and that may be a subject for another podcast at some point. And some employees love it, some don't. But Now that we've got that good understanding overall of workers' comp and how it functions, I want to dive back into our case. This one involves, and it's not going to so much talk about restrictions and how to utilize work and get people back to work. But this one is fascinating in that it involves a small action that seems very small, but had a major consequence. You see, there was a truck driver named James Gerald who was injured while stepping out of bed in his sleeper truck. Those trucks, and they got the big giant cabs behind them? Sure. So imagine this. You're a trainee. You're fresh out of truck driving school, following every directive to the letter. You're eager. You're ready to launch your career. Then in the blink of an eye, a seemingly harmless action, just stepping out of bed, ends with severe burns and a legal battle. And that's exactly what happened to James, whose story shows how small missteps can lead to big consequences. And in this episode, USA Trucks versus James Gerald. And you may have seen USA Trucks, by the way. They have it looks like an Air Force logo going down the road. They got a red, white, and blue with a star in the center. But his training journey, Mr. Gerald's training journey, took an unexpected turn.
Bum, 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 bum.
Boom, 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 boom. So, John, in 2014, Mr. Gerald, James, applied for a truck driving position with USA Trucks. He attended their truck driving school in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and after successfully obtaining his commercial driver's license, he's sent for a 2-day orientation. So following the orientation, he then goes on a training trip to Colorado with a USA Trucks trainer. The two men shared a sleeper berth in the truck, kind of a bunk bed type of thing, during the journey. And although James's trainer mentioned that James himself could go to a hotel room, it would be at his own expense. So he says, stay in the cab. This is my advice to you. So they're traveling all over the country, and they send him to Memphis for more training. And anyways, upon arriving, he gets a new trainer who takes him to a grocery for shopping in their upcoming trip and instructs him on where to store his belongings in the truck sleeper berth. And then the trainer emphasizes that they should sleep in the truck because, hey, we're leaving early for Texas tomorrow morning. And so James actually testified that he understood this as an instruction and had no other option but to sleep in that truck. And that is a very important point. That is a pivot, shall we say, to this story, or a linchpin to this story. Because the next morning, things take a sudden turn, or shall we say, plunge. You see, James climbs out of the top bunk early morning to perform the pre-trip inspection as he was instructed by his trainer. He inadvertently steps into a crock pot full of hot water, resulting in severe burns to both feet. He's rushed to the hospital.
Oh my God. Can you imagine? I mean, so I was saying during the break that I had been burned like this, where I got pushed into or fell into a hot boiling pot of water and I got my arm. And I remember it's like the pain is just terrible. And then like to think about being immersed in that hot water and hitting the nerves and all that damage. Oh my God, it must have been terrible.
And not expecting it. I mean, who's thinking about, so I guess the driver on the bottom must have been wanting to cook something. So he's got a crock pot and he's boiling water and and you're not expecting, you're like go down and it's like, what? Like that's not supposed to be here. Your brain. So anyways, look, James eventually, he ultimately healed, after some time. But what's fascinating here is the debate over whether James Gerald was performing employment services when the injury occurred. The company argued ultimately he wasn't on duty, but James Gerald claims that he was following the trainer's orders by preparing for work. So was Gerald on the clock? No. But was he following his trainer's orders, getting ready to start the shift? That's what sparked the legal battle. And ultimately, and we're going to talk more about this as to why, this was in Arkansas. Arkansas Workers' Compensation Commission ruled in James Gerald's favor, determining that by sleeping in the truck and preparing for the inspection, Gerald was advancing his employer's interests. His injury was compensable. Boom.
Yeah, and so now, where did it go after that? So did it stop at the commission, or did they appeal it? And then what did the court say, and how did that all kind of finish up? I want to hear the end of the story. What happened?
So the ruling hinged on an Arkansas law, which I will tell you that's not an unusual law. A lot of states have this type of law, this kind of position on these things. But it defines compensable injury as one that happens while advancing an employer's interests, whether or not the employee is actively working at the moment. Since Gerald was required to sleep in his truck to facilitate early departure, his actions directly benefited the employer. I'll give you an example how I see it in my world is I have an employee that is parks in the employee parking lot off property, and they are walking in, and they've got they're not on the clock yet, but they're on property. They're in their uniform. They're walking to work, to go to work, and they step on a coconut seed. Okay? I'm telling you, rips their ankle. Okay? They're not on the clock, but guess what? That's a compensable thing in workers' comp. I've had employees, get out of a morning meeting, and they just clocked in, and they're not even really doing any work, but they're walking maybe to the lunchroom, or they grab a quick snack or something, and they fall in the pothole in the parking lot. That is a compensable thing. So anyways, that's what this whole thing hinged on.
Right. So that's a pretty big point, right? That's the big point. It shows that even when an employee is not clocked in, not on the clock, their actions can still be considered part of their employment if they're following company directives.
Yeah. So I got to tell you a story. It's years ago, and I don't even know if this is back in the day, wage and hour law, whatever. But I worked at Universal Studios, and we had this water slide in this playland area called Fievel's Playland. And kids would get on this raft, and they would go down this water chute. It was very fun, and it was all themed as if you were a little mouse, and in the Fievel cartoon movie. And twice a year, maybe 3 times a year, the slide needed waxed. So all the employees that worked at Fievel's Playland, we would come in at night, and we would wax the slide. And then we would have races down the water slide. So it's 2-man teams, and we would go, and then someone would be down at the bottom clicking. We would, and we call it was great. It was fun, great fun or whatever. But there's 2 people in a raft, and they're gonna launch off, and one in the back goes forward to launch, and the other one sitting in the front of the raft leans back, and it breaks the guy's nose, and they go down the water slide. By the time they get down, there's blood everywhere, whatever. That was a workers' compensation case.
It's interesting, right? Because I worked at a performing arts center, and our artistic director, pretty much the big boss, right? The artistic director was a big volleyball person. And so at some point, we set up a volleyball net. And I remember where there was one lunchtime, he's like, "Come on, John, you need to come play volleyball with us. We need you." And so I played volleyball, but now looking back on that, right, not as bad as your slide. No one got injured. But if I had gotten injured, it was under his direction, right? He was the one telling me it wasn't. Would it be, let me ask you this, Chuck. Would it be different if there's a volleyball net on property and a group of employees say, "Hey, we're just going to go play that"? Would that be compensatable?
That starts, I don't know. I think here's why it was for my thing. First of all, we did not pay the employees to slide to the, this is like, I'm a 26, 27-year-old supervisor. There's no one telling me about wage and hour law. We're just making up our rules in operations as we go along. But we were doing work for the company and then having fun. So, but I think that if it's solely for fun, intramurals is a good example. When I worked at Disney, we had softball fields, and employees that would get hurt sliding into second base, that was not a workers' comp thing.
But if they swam in a home, that was different. I'm just kidding.
But they
yeah, I mean, again, it's interesting, right? Because there is all those lines, and my advice, and I know we're gonna get into this, but my advice always is make sure you're talking to your workman's comp, and if you have any questions about it, ask before it happens, not when it happens, right?
Yeah,
because the workman's comp is an insurance company. Their goal is not to pay out, right? And so just kind of being aware.
Their goal is to do whatever, and whatever the right thing to do with the adjusters. So anyways, look, the key takeaway here is employee services aren't always limited to the official start of a shift. When your policies and instructions indirectly require employees to do something, even if it's not directly performing a job duty, you may still be on the hook for workers' comp if something goes wrong. So be mindful of those broader implications and instructions given to employees.
So what should we, HR department of one, HR departments, what should we do to avoid this from happening? I mean, obviously, most of us are probably not dealing with truck drivers and being in sleeper cabs and all that kind of stuff. But what should we do going forward?
Sure. So overall, one of the main things, like I said, is instructions. And as we always say, managers are agents of the company. John, you push that in class. I know you just taught a class today. What class did you teach, by the way?
I taught for people that were new to HR.
People that are new to HR. So you and I teach employment law for supervisors and managers and all that. We tell them, you are an agent. Whatever you say, whatever instruction you give, the employee follows it because they believe they have to. That is, you are the company to them. So you could be on the hook. So breaking it down, 3 lessons. Lesson 1, clarity in employment instructions. When issuing directives for, let's say, travel or out of office situations, it's essential to be clear about what's expected. If your instructions imply that employees must sleep in certain accommodations or be available during off hours, you're responsible for their safety. If you say it could be, John, you do not take the public transportation. You need to walk down the street and stay off the sidewalk. Make sure you stay on the street because it'll be quicker. Something goofy like that, and they get hit by a car. Guess what? I mean, I know it sounds goofy, but I've seen goofy.
Yeah, and while you're on this subject, I'm going back to your story of the second trainer, telling him that, hey, we need to sleep in the cab, we need to get in there, you need to stay overnight. And of course, right, your new supervisor, your new trainer says that, you're going to follow what they say. Okay, yep, that's what you want me to do. I'm going to do
Absolutely.
it without hesitation.
Yeah. And that's the way that trainer-trainee thing, if properly set up, is always viewed and facilitated. So Lesson 2, look at the scope of employment services. This case shows that employment services extend beyond those traditional working hours. So once again, the implications, employee actions that can benefit the company, even indirectly, you're on the hook. And Lesson 3, overall workers' compensation awareness. You need to constantly always be looking, always be aware of how workers' comp laws apply, what are things that could be potential hazards. I make a habit, pulling on railings and, looking for, you just got to be always aware. Workers' comp awareness. Learn how workers' comp works, and then, just keep in mind the duties of your employees.
Yeah, I mean, again, right? It's making sure that your policies are airtight and always considered everything in terms of employee safety and directives. Understand that bigger picture. I think comes really important, and kind of what you're saying to us.
Yeah, exactly, and you need to stay proactive, up to date. At the end of the day, protecting your employees means protecting your company.
So there you have it. I think, guys, this has been great. It's been a powerful reminder. I love that you picked this subject up because it's not something that we dive into a lot. And it's something that people need to be aware of for sure. It's not just about the obvious things like forklifts and climbing tie and going in there. It's about anticipating everyday situations, like getting out of bed in the morning. Where can they sleep? Because it could turn into a safety hazards. And so just again, clarity in communication, clarity in expectations, making sure the employees feel safe, and that if there's any question about their safety, they're reaching out to the appropriate people, even when it seems completely benign, right? And so I'm sure there's a lesson here about using a crock pot in the back of your truck when somebody else is sleeping, and what's the proper way to do that. I am sure U.S. Trucks went through that and had that conversation with a lot of people.
Yeah. And look, if you're not thinking about it, the law certainly is.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. A couple reminders. Please, if you want to text us, it's right there on the bottom, right there in the comments. Just text us. Let us know what you're thinking. What other stories do you want us to talk about? What questions do you have for us? Any of that stuff, just go ahead and do that. Make sure that you're reaching out to us. Do not forget, the Ultimate Guide to HR is now out, ready for you. Make sure that you get it. And also reach out to us. Both Chuck and I love coming into organizations and helping you get HR right, helping your leaders get HR right. Here's the thing. When our leaders, from supervisors up to presidents, when our leaders get HR right, it makes our job easier. And sometimes, I have to say it, it's the outside edge, right? It's the outside person getting in there and doing that as well.
You're listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.